everyone, and especially welcome to Matt Vickers tonight. As this is a workshop talk, the talk that Matt's giving us will be followed by breakout groups for about 10 minutes to share thoughts on what we've heard, and then we'll come back together for Q&A with Matt, and we will be finished by 8:15 at the latest. So I'm going to ask Judith first, please, to open with a prayer. Over to you, Judith.
Indeed. This is a prayer that comes from the World Council of Churches. And a little bit more. Creator God, the sun, the wind, and the waves are your gifts for the flourishing of the whole community of life on Earth. Help us to use them creatively to produce sustainable energy for all. Through scientists, engineers, and scholars, new knowledge comes to light. May new developments in the production of sustainable energy protect our fragile planet and promote the well-being of all peoples and all creatures on their journey to wholeness. We pray for the work of community energy and for all international, national, and local leaders that they may be guided by your spirit to make wise decisions about sources of sustainable energy for all. Creator God, you have blessed humankind with understanding, imagination, and memory. Show us how to learn from past mistakes and plan for the future creatively and responsibly. Amen.
Thank you, Judith. Well, Dr. Matt Vickers is the new Chief Executive Officer of Community Energy England, the national voice for community energy. And most recently, Matt led the UK's Grid Connections Reform Programmes as Director of Connections Reform for the National Energy Systems Operator, helping to unlock an impressive £40 billion a year of private investment in energy infrastructure and accelerating the deployment of much-needed clean power. So, Matt, over to you, please.
Okay,
thank you.
You just bear with me while I'll share the screen. Well, I'll do a little bit about me first, and then I'll share the screen. So yes, there's the intro there. So I am 12 weeks into this new role as Chief Exec of Community Energy England. Yeah, a bit about my background. I've done all sorts of things. So I've not been energy like right from the start. I'm from Liverpool originally. I've lived in Scotland. I've lived in Spain. I've worked for the Foreign Office. I used to sell beer, actually. I sold beer and iron brew around sales forces back in the day when I worked in food retail originally. I was the energy ombudsman, so dealing with, consumer protection. And that was my first foray into energy back in 2015. So I was there for 8 years, and that was all about, yes, consumer protection if people had complaints about energy suppliers. When I left there, I joined NESO, so Connections Reform, as you said there in introduction. So I was on the NESO exec team for about 18 months. Connection Reform was really big and important because it was, as you've said there, the challenge that we've got on our grid is how do we get all of these renewable assets, all of this renewable generation on the grid, and how do we deal with demand? Because if we're going to make the most of those renewable sources that the prayer talks about, it's a real challenge. And it means that our grid has to expand to places that it didn't do before, because our grid was designed for fossil fuels, and it was designed so you more or less had fossil fuels by and large ran in a seam down the middle of the country. Whereas a lot of the resources that we've got now run around the edges of the country. So once you start looking at things like wind power, which is the backbone of renewable energy, but also when you look at solar and some of the things that are possible with hydropower and other sources. So as I say, I'm kind of been in for a little bit over 2 months. So what I thought I'd do today is just explain a little bit about Community Energy England as an organisation, explain a little bit the context about what's going on with clean power from the government, and a bit about where we're going at the moment with community energy and what we're doing. So first, starting off then with what is community energy. So really, what's special about community energy? I mean, if you look at the GB system, in some European countries, most notably kind of Denmark or Germany, you'd be talking about community energy being as much as sort of 40–50% of the energy system is community energy. And what we mean by community energy is a few things. I've talked a lot there about the supply side of community energy, but there's a demand side as well. So on the supply side, that's where it is communities owning things like wind farms, solar installations, hydropower, energy from waste. But there's also a demand side, which is where a lot of community energy organisations will do work on things like retrofit, energy efficiency, energy advice, fuel poverty, etc. So it's both those sides of things, kind of supply and demand. But the heart of it, what it's really is it's about community. It's about solutions that are owned by the community and for the community to energy challenges. So again, historically, we've had a very top-down energy system that viewed all of us as people and communities as kind of passive recipients of energy that was made by big fossil fuel plants. And it was really just about, a very top-down with all of us as consumers. Where the system's moving as you get into renewable energy and some of these supply and demand things that I'm talking about, is it's a much more exciting and evolving role that communities can have. So where communities have got involved in this, it's come out of really community-driven solutions. Now, there are all sorts of different governance models that people do. So some of them are mutual, some of them are cooperatives, some of them are community benefit societies. But what they've got in common is they're all groups where communities have got together and they're looking to power those local solutions on supply and demand. And the benefit of that is it means that ownership and accountability sits within the community. But really crucially, the benefit does as well. So typically in community energy, what you'll end up with is the profits that you'd make from generation go back to the community who've invested in ownership of the assets. And the surpluses, the profits, then get reinvested back into the wider community. So there are all sorts of things that it might get invested into. For lots of them, they'll use the money that they make from generation to fund some of that work on energy efficiency, on fuel advice, fuel poverty support, and so on. But not all of it is just about energy. So sometimes it's used for things like some people have used it to fund things like electric vehicle clubs that can help people, shared vehicles so that people can green their transport. Sometimes it's about nature recovery. That could be as simple as improving a local park, or it could be things like planting woodland. There's all sorts of things that are all those benefits of once the community has that governance and control of the profits, it can then make a lot more benefit for the community. But why is it? I mean, touched on a couple of these things here, but one of the reasons why the wider energy sector is so interested in this is planning and acceptance of the infrastructure required, pylons and some of the things that need built at distribution and transmission, or whether you're talking about big battery parks, solar farms, etc. Clearly, there's a lot more local acceptance of those and faster opportunities for decarbonisation when local communities have had that chance to put their voice. So you tend to find that things will get through local planning better or more often. And that's obviously of interest to renewables developers. It also means that there's access to different sources of finance. So lots of these schemes, they are open to local investment. So there's an opportunity to be able to blend funding from local investment along with other forms of finance. But as well as a kind of educational piece. So surveys have shown that more than half of the public would be likely to reduce their energy consumption in support of a community energy project. So community energy, going back to when I was talking about selling beer, many of you will remember I used to actually sell Heineken, and their motto was about reaches the parts that other beers can't reach. And in some ways, that's what community energy does. It reaches the parts of society and reaches parts of this kind of transition and convincing people around the transition that conventional energy approaches don't always reach. I've touched on the community wealth building aspects already, but I think that the central point about it is the big risk, and where we're seeing some of the political debate now around net zero, which is very definitely becoming a kind of contested term and a risky term in the transition, is it's a really clear example of where communities and people are put at the heart of the transition. So it's about communities taking ownership and driving that fair and inclusive clean energy transition themselves, rather than infrastructure and the energy transition being something that's done to us, that's done to our communities. And I think that point about legitimacy, trust and mandate is so important as we look to the future, because there is a lot more argument now around the energy transition and that concept of net zero. So it's not just about net zero, it's the wider benefits that the community energy can release. A little bit about the community energy impact. I mean, for those of you who are interested in it, we do a report called State of the Sector. The reason why these are the 2024 figures is the 2025 results are just about to come out, looking at the past year. But what we do is we put together, Community Energy England has about 330 members up and down the country. This piece of work is one that we do with our colleagues in Community Energy Scotland and Community Energy Wales. And it pulls up that overall impact about what's the impact that we've had in Great Britain. So you can see, just pulling out some of the figures here, there you can see over 60,000 people that have been reached on energy efficiency initiatives. It's created new jobs, so 88 full-time equivalent new jobs. Down at the bottom right there, it boosted local economies by about approaching 21 million. You look at how much community-owned electricity we generate. Well, it's the equivalent of over 200,000 UK households. And that environmental impact, at least 120,000 tonnes of carbon that are saved. So, albeit that, as I said at the start, community energy at this point isn't quite at the same scale that it is in some European countries, nonetheless, it's already making a really big impact in terms of environment, in terms of society, in terms of investment, jobs and skills. So it really is something that we're getting across to policymakers about the opportunity for community energy. We're seeing a lot more. So why is there a moment right now where there's so much interest in community energy? It really comes out of two things. Again, you're probably aware that when this current government came in, when I was at NESO, part of it was the government asked NESO, the National Energy System Operator, to come up with a plan that would say, how would we be able to run our electricity system so that it was clean power? With the target being, could we get to the point where 95% of our electricity system was clean power by 2030? Now, the reason why that's important is, in the first point, it takes carbon out of our electricity system, which is a big climate, carbon emitter in its own right. And during the time that I was at NESO, we were seeing a lot of progress on that. We now no longer have coal, for example, anywhere on our electricity system. We shut the last coal-fired plant. So there's a wider clean power point that this ties into. The excitement for community energy is there's now been the local power plan, which has been published, and that's part of where the government's set up with GB Energy. There's now GB Energy as a kind of public enterprise, and that's all about saying the government wants to see over 1,000 local and community energy projects that will come up partly from £1 billion investment that's coming in, and partly through capacity building, because the community energy sector is still predominantly a volunteer sector. So it's important that there's not just funding there, but there's work to say, how do we build the skills, how do we attract communities and put the right governance and support around these to make sure that in every corner of the country, we've got communities ready to take advantage of the opportunities. So, a lot going on. Most recently, there was a report that happened last week, actually, within Parliament from ESNES. So within Parliament, you have the department looking after net zero as energy security and net zero, DESNES. And then ESNES is the cross-party committee that looks at that and holds that to account. So we were really pleased to see a report that came out last week talking about turbocharging community energy as part of the energy transition. I'm really looking at those opportunities to take community energy further and faster, because it really will speed up adoption and speed up the transition. So I've touched on some of this a bit already, but we're the national network. So effectively, we're the membership body, the practitioner body for community energy in England. And we're all about how do we create those conditions where community energy can thrive and scale. We work with loads of different partners, but predominantly the things that we're trying to do would fall into 3 areas. So some of it is about influence. It's about how do we work with government, with local authorities, with combined authorities, with Ofgem, the regulator, so that we can create the kind of policy and regulatory environment that lets community energy grow. Because again, we've had a system where policy and regulation wasn't really set up for community energy. So that's a big part of our work. The second bit is about engagement. So I touched on those partners that we work with. There's an ever-increasing demand for community energy, but that involves really close collaboration with people like the network operators, so the transmission and distribution system that you may have heard of, people like Scottish Power Energy Networks or National Grid or Northern Power Grid, making sure that working with them so that community energy can come on quickly, and also working with them at some of the opportunities that they've got around how do they tackle fuel poverty, where we can have a real role to play in that. And lastly, there's that point about enabling. So we're looking at how do we help community energies right across the country get access to those resources, obviously funding, but the other support skills, the things where so often the challenges that we'll see, another organisation has already had to solve them. So by bringing that together and really collaborating and cooperating, we can grow the movement in capacity, in scale, and in impact. So as I say there, our main purpose is we're that national voice, policy advocacy, skills, and joining us to the wider system. On that, it was really pleasing to see we've had a campaign running this year, was involved in the launch of it in Westminster back in March, just before I started, which is called Up the Energy. And luckily, well, it wasn't luck, it was a lot of hard work that's gone into it. But the NESO committee, as last week, called for many of the things that we've been calling for in the Up the Energy campaign. So kind of things that we've been calling for there on that is, how do we make sure that energy is recognised in the planning regime? How do we make sure that community energy is recognised there, that it's something important that we want to protect? Some things making sure that when there is money coming through from government, that it's not always just going to leafy kind of suburbs that might have some of the skills or some of the free time to be able to deal with this. But it's really, really important that we've got community energy and we've got models that will work for all sorts of communities up and down the country, urban, disadvantaged, etc. It's really important that some of that funding and focus, a good chunk of that goes in there. There are some things that we want to see change around making it easier for community energy organisations to sell their energy in the market. I mean, some of you might well be familiar with this, but energy markets can be quite technical and highly regulated. And there's a real opportunity for communities to be able to sell cheaper energy to people. That would mean cheaper bills, because we don't have some of the same things that you would need to have as an energy supplier. But it also means that then there's that kind of business model that can work for these community enterprises that makes the maths add up and means that we can do more of this. So, if you're interested, there's a QR code there. But again, you can go on our website. Lots that we're going to be doing on Up the Energy through the rest of the summer and the autumn, really getting out into different parts of the country to show what's the opportunity, showcasing how much it can deliver and what can be done. So, it may well be coming to a town or community near you. Look, I mean, that was really, by way of an intro, that was what I wanted to cover off. Was I've put up there a few things. We've got lots of things on our website. We're on LinkedIn, Blue Sky. There's the Up the Energy campaign. If any of you are already involved in community energy groups, it's worth checking. Are you a member? If you're not a member, then please do join us. Because as I say, the real strength comes from us all collaborating and having that shared common voice. But hopefully what I've given you a sense of, just to start with and provoke a bit of a conversation, is what's the opportunity around community energy, which is broader than, the important thing, the saying I've got is not all kilowatts are created equal. Not all energy is equal. The kind of energy that we're working with in community energy is more valuable than the kind of energy that you get from a nuclear power station or from a vast wind turbine, because it delivers those social, those environmental, those economic benefits. So look, I hope that's been helpful just by way of an introduction. And what I'll do is I'll stop sharing from there so we can all see each other and start the conversation.
Matt, that was superbly comprehensive. Thank you so much. We're going to go into, it's rather like if you were doing this live, you turn around and chat to your neighbour for a few minutes. So we've got a question, which I hope David is putting in the chat, but what possibilities might the energy transition call communities of faith to? And what next? Welcome back, everybody. And we now have a chance to ask Matt any questions we want to, or if there's something that's really good you've come up with in your breakout room you'd like to share with us. So either put your virtual hand up or your actual hand up. And Matt is here to hopefully respond to us all. John Anderson, you unmute yourself and go ahead.
Yes, I wonder if he has examples of churches which are the powerhouse of the community, not just spiritually, which we would claim to be, but also for electrical generation, etc. The church is such a central position in so many communities that it seems obvious, but I don't yet know a church which is the centre of a community energy project.
Right. I mean, we do have somewhere where there are churches at the centre of a community project. And I can share, I'll share a case study if I can find one with you all after. But you're right. I mean, the big opportunity, generally what you need if you're looking at the generation, the supply side of community energy, is you're generally looking for, is there a community that's prepared to get behind this and invest it and run and do that? And you're also looking for, is there some form of generation asset? Is there an opportunity to make a generation asset? And that generally comes with land or a roof. So as you're saying there, John, the opportunity around churches, and it's something that we're very interested in, churches or indeed, whatever other place of worship, you would have thought there should be a natural opportunity. We were talking in our breakout group, surprisingly at times, and this is one of the things that I'm wanting to get involved in a bit more, it can be really difficult because sometimes just the governance of getting the diocese to agree sometimes, and then you can end up even within the diocese, you'll have one side of the diocese that is more concerned with the fabric, and sometimes I think there are a lot of obstacles that can happen within the kind of the way that dioceses work that get in the way of some of this. So I'm really interested in hearing any experiences that you've got of what those are, where you think we might be able to help unblock. I mean, in one of my previous roles at the Ombudsman, one of the church commissioners was, as well as being a church commissioner, she was on our board. So I'm going to be speaking with her because she was involved in, a lot more of the stuff around the finance side of things. And I'm going to see what is there that we could do at a national level, because some of this you have to do a bit top down as well as bottom up. Is there something that we look at the national level to say what a real opportunity this is, for the church, but both economically and of course in again making that point that you've made, John, about putting the church back at the centre of a community and providing all sorts of needs and having different ways to engage with it with the community and schools and education, for example.
So has anybody got anything they could respond back to, Matt, on?
So we've got Settle Community Energy, and it's Settle Methodist Church, Settle Catholic Church, Paul Kelly, Barbara. So those are the big generators, and there's a few people who've got houses as well. So we all join together and we can put out, in theory, we put our energy into the system, and then people also join the club. So if you've got a house where it's just impossible to make your own solar panels, then you can join it and you can buy from our system. So you buy it from us at a cheaper rate than your normal electricity, and we get a much better rate from the system than we do from the ordinary electricity. Unfortunately, we've got a huge block in that Methodist Church has a shared drive, and we have to put a cable in it. And we put the solar panels in about 19 months, a year and a half ago. The solar panels are all there gleaming, but because we haven't got the cable, because our solicitors were so slow, and we changed solicitors, eventually, after many months, they came up with what they could do. And they gave it to the lady on the other side of the drive, and unfortunately, she died. She was a really good lady, and wouldn't, they sort of agreed with the idea, but they wouldn't do anything. They said, well, wait till we sell the house. And so the house is still up for sale, and you're just sort of tearing your hair out. I mean, meanwhile, the community energy is sort of going, but it can't go full blast because the major source isn't there. And it's just been it still is frustrating because it might get sold next week, or it might be another year till it gets sold. Pray for this sale to go ahead quickly.
Matt, can you give any helpful comfort?
No, I mean, look, to be honest, this is exactly the reason why community energy, for those of you who have been involved, this as you're saying there, Judith, it really is sometimes, it's hard work, isn't it? Particularly as a lot of the people involved are volunteers. So I can't really give any kind of, easy answer about what's that about. I think more broadly, what you're talking about, Judith, is we're looking at saying, and we talked a bit in our breakout panel, we're looking at how to make it easier so that when you do generate, you have got guaranteed prices for what's called your offtake, so that when you're selling it, how can we make it easier for you to be able to sell the excess energy onto your local community? Because that's where you can really make the thing work. As you say, you can end up reducing bills, but you can also then end up with a surplus that lets you go and do more of that. So we're absolutely looking at doing, more of that. It'd be interesting, actually, Judith, because I'm Northwest England based myself, so maybe separately we'll see if I can pop up and because I'm always up for getting out and about and seeing community energy,
Love to have you.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see, because it'd be a great case study about what's happened with it. I'm really interested in what it sounds like is you did it across a whole faith community, so you've got different denominations involved. How did you go about that? Because that's a really interesting way of doing it.
Because we're a small town, we've got strong churches together. The churches do work very well together.
Yes, yeah. And any kind of insights that you got from that you'd say for others to think about, or for us to think about how to make that work? It just came out of, because you're that small town, the relationships were there, did it?
Didn't a lot about just take settle as it is. Yeah, do come and visit us. It's between Leeds and Lancaster.
Yeah. No, well, I'll have a look and see if I can pop up. You're the one with the nice railway, aren't you, Settle?
Yes.
Yes, that's right.
Be interesting though what other sort of, like people were saying, they should build on car park, put our discussions somewhere else, saying you should have shelters over car parks. But so many places if you're going to put up solar panels, you've got to decide if it's economical or not. So would be welcome suggestions for other ways of where else you can put solar panels.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some things about there are some tools, and I'm thinking there's one that I saw that actually would be relevant for you. That's the Northwest Net Zero Hub. I've done some work where they've done, I think they did it because I went to something at Lancaster University it was just when I started community energy. So there are some tools that you can get access to that will do things like have a look at local roofs, and it works out what's the configuration of the roof, which way it's facing, how much sun is there. And it starts to tell you how many sites, how many megawatts you'd get off it, that sort of thing.
I think they might have done that already.
Yes. Yeah. That can be really helpful.
Talk to other people, because I'm not a major, I just live here and I'm not part of it.
I can see Clive's got her hand up there, Barbara.
Go ahead, Clive.
Oh, you're on mute, Clive.
On mute, there we go. It's an interesting discussion, but I mean, what sort of amount of energy do you need to be generating to make it worthwhile having a community energy project? I mean, we've got 5 kilowatt on the roof and the 20 kilowatt battery, which isn't much to share. That works for us. I think I'm not sure if the church has got about 20 or 30 kilowatts, but it's kilowatts. So how would you then share that with the community?
Well, you're right, and that's not for everyone. So some schemes just look at saying, look, all I'm trying to do is become more self-sufficient, and that can work. That can work where people
Okay.
are looking at saying, look, I'll just do it this way. So not all community energy is about some vast roof that I'm then going to do and sell on to everyone else. There's plenty of schemes that are just saying, look, I'm trying to reduce my own energy bill. How can I do that? And they do that through some sort of community setup. So you're right. You know, we have got some members where you are talking into the, you know, you're talking kilowatts. You're not talking megawatts even. So you know, there's short answer is there's no kind of lower limit on scale. The thing that I would say is if people are trying to make the thing pay off and the payback rates, again, this is where you do feasibility studies. And there are some grants that have been available in the past from GB Energy and others to look at feasibility studies. That's really where it will have a look and say, well, look, for what you're trying to do, what's the yield that you might get off a particular site? What's your options about where you might put it? And that can help again with that level of ambition and that level of making sure you have really got something that is viable. Because to your point, Clive, depending on what you're trying to do, there are some times where it just isn't viable. Particularly going back to what I was saying before earlier, with the market the way it is at the moment, you used to get the thing called the feed-in tariff. And the feed-in tariff was pretty attractive because, you know, the money that you would get, but that's where a lot of, particularly in the southwest of England, you had a lot of solar schemes that came through. As the feed-in tariffs being phased out, that's one of the big policy asks that we've got at the moment is how do we create something that means it's easier for communities to be able to sell their energy. You know, the short answer, as I say, is people do this at all sorts of scales. It's just making sure, getting some advice and seeing what's feasible and what's your level of ambition.
Thank you, Clive and Matt. Liz, do you want to come in now?
Yes, a question. I put a link in the chat. Steve Shaw, who's behind Power for People,
Yes.
which I think is the private members bill. I've sort of lost track a bit. Is there any connection, or do you work together at all with
Yeah,
him?
we do. So I saw Steve. Well, he was one of the first people I saw when I joined Community Energy England. So where Steve's been fantastic is Steve's work. Steve works a lot with us. He's really good at doing some of that work in Parliament. So you're right. There is a kind of he's trying to get private members behind things, particularly on this question about local energy markets. So we're looking at different routes, you know, as you do whenever any of you who've got experience of trying to get legislative change. So we're working with Steve. We're working with, that's where that ESNES report that I was talking about is really valuable as well. It gives us some ammunition. But we're putting a lot of hope in the Energy Independence Bill, which was announced in the King's Speech. And what we've heard is the Energy Independence Bill is going to be the vehicle that hopefully will let us tackle some of these things that are needed about offtake, fair pricing for community energy and so on. But Steve's great. Yeah, he's doing some fantastic work.
Yeah, Green Christian has supported Steve for many, many years.
Yeah,
He's
he's
absolutely
doing really
super.
good work.
And David's just put in the chat that he gave us a talk some while ago. So if anyone doesn't know what Steve's doing, look on the YouTube channel, Green Christian, and you'll find Steve's workshop there. He's super.
He is, he's really good.
Jacqueline, is it Jacqueline or David? Which of you wants to come in? Or is it both of you?
Yeah, it's Dave. What do we have to say about, because it's supposed to be community-based and local, keeping the installation local and maintenance local? Because I know that East Suffolk did a system where, you know, you could hopefully get a large group of people to buy stuff, but then you have people coming down from, you know, miles down from the north of England to Suffolk to do installation, and to me you're losing the heart of a community-based system, really. You know, do you have much to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think where possible, look, at the end of it, as you know, we don't govern any of our members, so it's up to our members to make the choices that, you know, that they want to make. But I think that point that you're saying there about being able to build local jobs. It's all part of that story about what's the benefits to the community. Local jobs, local opportunities, local skills. And again, that's one of the reasons why when GB Energy is looking at this, where we're working with them, they're looking at saying, well, how can we kind of break the thing up into regions a bit more? So that you don't get that situation that you're talking about, where if a community is doing something, it knows that it's got a more local supplier, that it can bring wealth to a local community. Because that's an important part of what's going on.
Mark Dick, I think you've been trying to get in. I know whether you've got a problem with your microphone. You want to put something in the chat? We can read it out if you want to ask a question.
I think if my video's not working, maybe you can hear me.
Can hear you. Okay, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would just ask, do you think that GB Energy has got a big enough budget or a pot of money to drive the community energy scene forward if it's about to take off?
I suppose the short answer from GB Energy themselves would say this is no, because so what they're having to do, there's a lot of work at the moment that we and others have been involved in around what they're calling their product suite. So one of the challenges for GB Energy is they are a public enterprise. So because the money comes from Treasury will expect a return on that. And that means that GB Energy have had to think really carefully about what type of products and what type of projects will they get behind. And that means they're having to make some choices around where to focus. So what I would say is, and some of you might know Fraser Stewart, who's the head of strategy for GB Energy, for local strategy for GB Energy. I was at the Co-op Congress in Birmingham recently, and Fraser's really engaging. This was the point he said. He said, look, GB Energy is not going to save community energy. It's not like this is a magic bullet. What they are hoping to do is by crowding in, as they call it, but how can they get a lot more private investment, blended finance in? Because what an investment from GB Energy can do is it can reduce the overall risk profile. It means that private investors might then be prepared to put some of their money in. And it's kind of that multiplicative effect. But you'd probably expect me to be saying, as the chief exec of a sector body, is it enough? No, of course it's not. But it is enough to make a meaningful, substantial kind of strategic input into the growth of the sector. So it's, it is a really exciting, meaningful step forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. John.
Nobody's mentioned car parks yet. The government has just axed its initiative to look at putting PV above car parks, much to my fury, but the French have done it on their big car parks. And if we ever want a community resource, which is massive in our country and underused because the car parks are empty more than they're full, this is an area for putting PV panels above car parks, and the community would be involved because, of course, the community puts its cars under it.
We had a discussion about this, Matt, on our internal discussion this morning.
Right.
And somebody was saying there's problems with the car parks, that they're often, I don't understand it, but they're kind of people investing in them who don't actually put much capital into them.
Yes.
But then they kind of move and somebody else moves in. And so it's not a kind of stable ownership.
No.
Yes. Well, funnily enough, when I was saying I've done many different things in my career, when I was I always describe myself as having been the energy ombudsman because it's easy for most people in energy, that makes sense. But actually the organisation I was running was called Ombudsman Services. And we were effectively the ombudsman for parking on private land. So private car parks. And you're absolutely right, John. The interesting bit there is there are a lot of private car parks that are owned by different people. Some of them are really well run, some of them are really well operated, some of them are verging on, cowboy type schemes. But that's speaking from my old world where I used to see them. So some of the conversation that we've been having with members is about they're saying, look, I think it's a space that we'll look to step more into as Community Energy England. because there are some things where if you're trying to do it on a local level, it's really difficult to know who you speak to, and we'll have hundreds of people up and down the country trying to have conversations with hundreds of different car parking owners. So we're starting to think about, well, are there some things that we could do with people like the British Parking Association and really broker some of those relationships that say, as you say there, if you've got land, if you've got some opportunities, what might you be able to do? Because car parks as well have got great opportunities about what can you then do with the offtake, because you've got natural offtake, which is electric vehicle charging. So you can put the whole thing very quickly into something that, you know, becomes quite an interesting proposition. This is all about our conference last week. We were talking about the challenges of mainstreaming, as we were calling it, community energy. How do you scale it up? And some of that, I think, for us at Community Energy England, is how do we have those national level conversations with people like churches, car parks, etc., to really take advantage of that.
And we mustn't forget the pets, dogs benefit because there's shade on the car park instead of getting too hot.
Yeah.
John, good point. Marissa, you mute yourself.
Yeah. How about ground source heat pumps under the car parks as well as solar over them?
And listen, I think what you're getting into here is something that's very, very exciting, because today, why I'm in London rather than the Northwest today, is because I've been at National Grid Distribution. They've held an innovation conference, and one of the points that I was trying to say to them was around what are called smart local energy systems. And the idea is, if you can start to do just as you're saying, if you can start to combine things like solar panels, electric vehicle charging with perhaps a battery. There's a consultation out now about community batteries. You could look at heat pumps. You could think about heat networks. All of a sudden, you can do something that creates a real opportunity to kind of power and heat our communities in very different ways. Because as I was saying at the start, you know, electrifying the decarbonising the electricity system, we've made a lot of progress as a country in the last particularly in the last 5 years, but in the last decade, huge amounts of progress. The bigger challenges that are ahead of us around getting to net zero is heat, transport and buildings. So smart local energy systems give you opportunities about how might you get into some of that. But they also mean that you can start to potentially do some things like, again, the world that I was in, the National Energy System Operator is the one that balances the grid, that makes sure the lights stay on. And there are some real opportunities to say, how can you balance the grid more locally and get paid to do that locally, provide services to the grid. And, you know, some of the members that we've got are starting to think about that and are doing work around, just as you say, combining different sorts of technologies in an overall solution.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Kathy, who helped us set up this meeting, was also intrigued by the grid. And I think you partly are answering this question. She wants to know, how is work being done with government and infrastructure designers to ensure there's capacity on the national grid for feed-in from local microgrids?
Yeah.
This is not done at pace, she says. Should your emphasis, community energy, be on needing to decarbonise homes and businesses without providing electricity to feed into the grid? In other words, we've got to go, do we need to go for alternatives?
I mean, look, the question of grid capacity that I touched on at the start, it is one of the biggest challenges that GB has, because effectively we've got, well, that's the reason why it is true when you hear people say about, are we turning off wind farms in Scotland because we don't have, we are at the moment. We don't have sufficient energy infrastructure to get it from where the renewables are being produced to where they would be consumed at the moment. Now, part of that is huge amounts of work that's changing in regulation. So Ofgem now, if you think about it, what Ofgem as a regulator used to do was, in order to keep all of our bills down, which it should be doing as a regulator, the general strategy was, well, I want people to build late and build little, because it's expensive building transmission and distribution assets and it hits us all on our bills. there's now a real shift that you're seeing in some of the price controls to say, no, we're going to need to build. Balancing that with the fact that it still costs money, and it costs money at a time when you'll have seen today, Ofgem, the price cap's gone up again. Doing that in a world where affordability is a challenge, that's really difficult. So I guess it's not something that Community Energy England does, but, you know, in my old world at NESO, or when you look at what would a regulator be doing, or National Grid or Scottish Power, any of these doing, there's a really fine balance between how do you get on with building network fast enough so that you can connect things and allow this kind of green rollout, while not doing it so fast that you end up with, we cripple people with the costs of infrastructure before the benefits hit. And that's the reason why some of the things that I've kind of touched on tangentially, like flexibility, become really important. The more that we can flex our use, so we're not all watching England games at the same time and putting big demands on the system, the more we can do that, the more value that's got. And again, that's where smart local energy systems and communities playing their part in flexibility, I think, is really interesting, because it can help to do that. It will help to connect things faster, balance the grid, and balance off that question about affordability versus infrastructure and economic growth.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Right, David.
Thanks, Matt. I was intrigued early on. You alluded to trying to come up with, with ways that not just people in sort of leafy suburbs with lots of income can do these things, but in other areas where, I mean, I live in between a rather nice area and one of the poorest council wards in the country, and I can sort of see that people could benefit. People on low incomes could benefit from schemes like this, but they don't have the wherewithal, and it's a lot of sort of terrace houses owned by all sorts of different people. There's it's pretty tricky. I think I'm in Leeds. I think the University of Leeds, where I work, has done, not me personally, I don't work in this thing, has done some experiment with ground source heat pumps. So I was interested that popped up, that there's an experiment, I think, going on somewhere. But again, organizing these things in relatively low income areas and that, what have you been able to come up with regarding?
I think there's some great things that some of our members are doing. I mean, one of the ones that springs to mind there, some of you might be familiar with it in Rossendale, Net Zero Terrace Street. And what they've done there is they've said in Rossendale, some of the hardest housing to decarbonise is those traditional kind of terraces, because they weren't built for weren't necessarily built for some of the technologies that we're talking about. So there's some great examples of people like Net Zero Terrace Streets doing that. There's some brilliant work, Repowering London. So they've done some brilliant work with Community Energy London more broadly around Brixton, and where you look at some other parts of London where there are some great examples of what people have done. It can be as simple as putting. There was a great one that I saw South East London, where they've looked at putting LEDs in schools, and actually the payback of just getting LEDs and things like that. It doesn't. I suppose one of the messages I'm keen to get across is it doesn't always have to be about let's go and build some vast solar installation, or there are lots of other ways that people do find to do this. That can make a real difference. But I think that's where some of the funding that's going to come in from GB Energy, that's why in Up the Energy, we're saying let's make sure that some of that is devoted to that question of making sure it reaches those communities that otherwise might not have been able to take part.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
In my locality, Energise Sussex Coast, which I imagine is part of your general network,
yeah,
they do a lot of work on helping people who can't afford to put in solar panels to at least do other things that are simpler things, that are cheaper things, like you've been talking about, LED bulbs, but to enable them to get their electricity bills down and save energy, but in ways that they can afford to do it. And so in poorer areas, that's probably a very important aspect of the work you're doing, isn't it?
I think it is, and I think that's where things like this community battery discussion that's going on at the moment is really interesting, because again, I used to live in Glasgow, and if you look at Glasgow, there's lots of people who either, well, I don't have a roof, so I can't put solar panels on, or I'm in rented accommodation, or I'm in somewhere where I don't have permission to change the fabric of the build, or all these sorts of things. And some of the advantages that you could get through things like community batteries is effectively it's about, well, you could have a shared battery as a service. So you don't have to have your own battery or your own assets or your own infrastructure. But you can be part of a community and get the benefits of that flexibility to get cheaper energy and so forth. So yeah, there's this was one of the messages I was giving to NGED today at the conference I was at. The level of innovation and creativity that there is in the community energy sector, thinking about these things, there's some fantastic examples. And I think it's our role at CEE about showcasing those and sharing those a bit more so that, we can get them rolled out faster and funded faster. Because there's all sorts of ways that you can use technology to reach everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Clive, you did have your hand up, you put it down. Did you want to come in again? I haven't got time for one more question.
Okay, no, I think you've covered a bit. It was to do with community batteries, but we've sort of covered a bit of what I was going to ask. And I mean that's something I'm quite keen on with the way I run my home, because I'm on an Octopus cozy tariff for heat pumps. But in the winter, I can charge the batteries up as well as run the heat pumps, and then run the heat pump off the battery between the gaps. So I can always pay the lower cost on the electricity. But if you scale that up, community batteries, I think, would be quite a good idea. I don't know, have a chat with the people at the church if they got room for a church community battery. And there's also other stuff coming on with EVs that would be able to charge the grid as well. But that's more of a personal thing, I guess, isn't it? Bi-directional charging on EVs and things of that sort.
Well, it could be, but again, I mean, we've got some members who do things like run car clubs or EV clubs. And again, if you've then got that common asset that you're holding, you're quite right, because someone was saying this at the conference today, if you look at how much, if you had, say, I don't know, a 5 kilowatt solar array on your roof, you might have a 10 kilowatt, be a battery, something like that. But if you look at what you've got on your drive, if you have your own car, it might well be that it's a 60, 70 kilowatt battery. Now, the opportunities of that, if you've then got an EV fleet that you're holding for the community, is your ability to charge and discharge that and effectively trade on the markets. Charge it when it's cheap and then discharge it when it's expensive. Great opportunities, again, about once you've got control of some of those assets. What can you do? As an aside, just a really fascinating one that I heard today that bowled me over. The largest electric vehicle fleet in the country, because again, you would think about this and go, oh yeah, well, it's fine if you can afford an electric vehicle. The largest electric vehicle fleet in the country is Motability scooters. And you start thinking about genuinely and the really exciting thing about that I was hearing today is there's some work going on to say, well, wait a minute, with Motability scooters, if you could schedule them, you know that you're not going to need them at some times of the day and other times you are. What a brilliant mobile battery fleet. That is a great example of where you might have benefits going first to the people who are most vulnerable. You don't have to be a kind of Tesla driver or whatever. What a great opportunity where the energy system's actually prioritizing helping the most vulnerable first. I thought it was a fantastic example.
But how do you set that up? Because I mean, I'm with Octopus Energy, and I have a very flexible tariff with them, which allows me to do that personally. But how would you then convert that into a community effort? Because would you need to set your own electricity company up or community electricity? What would you do?
Vehicle to grid, I guess, to be clear, vehicle to grid is not really widely, available. It is in other countries. I think BMW started doing it a lot within Germany. So this is what they were saying. What I was hearing today was some of the work that they're looking at with Motability and scooters might be that's one of the first bits where they'll try, can you make vehicle to grid work? Because at the moment it's more of an idea than something that you can do at scale. But looking to the future, it is one of the opportunities that you've got of having an EV car club would be, you sat then there on your own battery fleet and it's mobile as well, that makes it ultra interesting.
But how do you then get your battery fleet crazy because normally you're connected to, say, Octopus or one of the other large electrical suppliers. How could you then take control of how you bought and sold the electricity on the market as a group rather than doing it through a provider?
Yes, and this is where some of the things about aggregators come in, for example. So you can use aggregators to do it rather than a supplier, or some of the things that we touched on earlier, with that question about, you know, the energy independence bill and different market structures. One of the things that we're looking for is, look, if you can make it easier for communities to buy and sell their energy. I wasn't specifically meaning EVs in this scenario, but you can aggregate assets. You can say, right, we've got a fleet of assets, whether that be EVs, a set of batteries. We were talking in the breakout group earlier about, can you have more than one church with more than one roof? Yes, you can. You know, I think that's where the big opportunity is going to come for community energy at scale, is exactly about how might you aggregate. As a kind of last thought, one thing that I'm aware of that I suppose it's related in some dioceses about how it works and so on, but care homes is another great example about, if you get some care homes together, their energy usage tends to be really high. But a lot of them will have things like they've got roof space, or they might have a garden in the back, or they've got some of the things that you could do that you can then start to access that. So it's another example of these sorts of things where if we can pick up models and examples that we can scale, you can get a bit of volume into something that makes it easier to go to private finance and then get the funding for a portfolio in effect of projects. And that's where I would see EVs will go in the future. How do you start to bundle assets into portfolios? Because you can really get the economies of scale and, you know, the benefits out of being able to sell and look at flexibility at scale.
That was superb, Matt, and thank you for asking that question, Clive. I'm going to have to call this to a close, but we do usually keep the room open for a few minutes after we officially close at 15:15 if you want to stay and ask any more on this. Matt, that was a wonderful talk, and responses to questions, absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. Really
No problem.
grateful for your time.
Glad I could come along and talk. No, thanks for having me.
Good, that's lovely. I'm going to ask Judith just to finish with a prayer, please, Judith.
Right. This is called the Apache blessing. May the sun bring you new energy by day. May the moon softly restore you by night. May the rain wash away your worries. May the breeze blow new strength into your being. May you walk gently through the world and know its beauty all the days of your life. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Judith. Just a quick note that our next, it'll be a talk by Father Martin Paulson on the 15th of July, before we have a break over August. And he's going to be looking at Pope Leo's recent letter, and he's going to explore the ways in which the letter speaks to us in the context of climate and the nature crisis. So go to the Green Christian website to book your place.